All right, this is Carl, also known as Zarepath in the Custom Magic community, and today I wanted to record a short video about Design Draft. Design Draft is a project in the Custom Magic community where 8 designers all get one prompt and they each design independently 3 boosters for that set, their interpretation of the prompt. So for example, the first Design Draft, which we'll be looking at today, the prompt that everyone decided on was enchantments. So enchantments matter. And everyone had their interpretation of that. We all got together. We threw the cards in. As a designer, you've only seen the cards that you had designed, so you're looking at a lot of fresh stuff that deals with the same mechanical space. And it was a lot of fun, and it's a really interesting design project. I think a lot of times designers in our community want to make an entire set because that's what we see coming out of Wizards, and that's what is new and exciting. You have room for lots of mechanics, you can design a lot of cards, but those projects to actually be polished and really worthy of attempting, it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of work. And I know myself, having worked on the Metropolis for a really long time, I'm always tempted to just do a side project, to take a break, take some other design lessons I've learned and attempt them in a small space somewhere else. So Design a Draft was a good opportunity for that. It's not something that really would have been possible without the advent of plane sculptors and the Discord community and just the great technologies that we have now to communicate and correlate with other people. Now it's been hard to duplicate the first Design a Draft. There was another attempt run by somebody else. I organized the first one. It was my idea, and they wanted to do a multiplayer focus, and people just didn't pull the cards together. Right now we're doing another attempt to design a draft, and the focus, instead of being mechanical focus, is a flavor focus, which I thought was an interesting idea. The plane of Karsus, which I believe is a plane in Plane Chase, that uses crystal magic, and the crystal core of the plane has been shattered into 8 pieces, making 8 weird mirror universes of the same plane, which is really clever, I think. PR is the one throwing this together, by the way, the designer of Magic Villains, and so we all have different interpretations of the plane, but that's also explained by the flavor of 8 different little mirror universes. So I'm doing that. I'm really excited for how that goes. Hopefully people finish up their packs and we can see how it goes. But while Design a Draft was on my mind, I want to go back and look at this first one. So mechanical focus. Now I've got all 288 cards that were designed for it here, and I guess including some tokens. Some people were good enough to create tokens. I'm not going to look at every card, obviously. I'm going to be tempted to. I do want to hit on every plane and every mechanic, and then talk a little bit about designing enchantments, because I think there's a lot to learn from this. A lot of times people want to look at a card type in Magic and be like, let's do a set that focuses on this card type, like Zendikar did lands, and Mirrodin did for artifacts. Theros arguably did not do the same thing with enchantments, and I'll get to that in a minute. So this first card is from my plane, Simus. Now, I was thinking enchantments, what can I do with enchantments? And the thing I decided was I wanted there to be a plane where there was a mirror world, an alternate reality version of it. And that side of the plane would be represented by enchantments, so enchantment creatures and things like that. And so I thought, well, what else goes with, a mirror universe? And I thought, well, what about symmetry? Okay. So a lot of the flavor names in my cards are palindromes, where it's the same word spelled front ways and back ways. And the flavor is, the magic on the plane of Simus, Symmys, which is also a palindrome, relies on symmetry. So things have to be aesthetically symmetrical and sound in that way. And I mean, there's architectural reasons that symmetry is important. Like, I could see some people, deciding that if there was some magic to that, it's not too weird, I don't think. And so symmetry, power, and toughness actually matters in this set. So I had this keyword symmetry, that as long as this creature has equal power and toughness, it has first strike. Which reads kind of weird because this creature has symmetrical power and toughness already. So shouldn't it just say this has first strike? Well, what I wanted with symmetry was you have these creatures with symmetry, or you have spells with symmetry bonuses. You get in little fights with your opponent trying to make each other's creatures symmetrical or asymmetrical. So this guy goes in for a combat step, and he's going to have first strike and kill this guy instead of trading with it, but the other player boosts his toughness by 1, right? Which is not a play you normally make in Magic, but in this case, it then loses first strike and it trades instead of just demolishing the other creature. That's what I was looking for with this symmetry mechanic. Unfortunately, I don't know that it works that great, but that's what I was thinking. So Oddsbod, he has the set Imago, and Imago is very flavorful. Oddsbod is famous for having lots of flavor text. This is pretty normal right here, but he's lots of characters, lots of flavor text, and I think there's an enchantment sub-theme in Imago, and what he did for this designer draft is he covered some districts of his plane that he didn't have space to cover in his main set, and just kind of brought him in here. And he has some interesting mechanics. So Melancholia means when this dies, it returns with a memory counter and becomes an enchantment, which is kind of weird by itself. Like, why would I want this to be an enchantment? Like, what does that do then? Does it do anything? I think new players might think it then becomes an aura that you can bestow on another thing, because it's an enchantment, right? It doesn't do anything by itself, but Oddsbod had an interesting and unique take on enchantments where you create all of these enchantments, after your creatures die or whatever. They become these enchantments indicated with tokens, so you don't try and attack and block with them. And you can tap them for different effects. So you have a lot of things that want to be, tap 3 untapped enchantments you control, have this effect. Somewhat parasitic, but it was a unique approach. I did notice a lot of reprints. When you think about a mechanical focus, a natural way to think design-wise is, okay, what has Wizards done with this already? Okay, well, they've had Auramancers, they've had the counterspell Annul, other famous cards that interact with enchantments, and there was a good amount of reprints, but not a lot. This was my symmetry trick. Burr had a really interesting mechanic that is not here, but I really like this rhyme. Shadow Centaur did some Laredo stuff. Okay, Figment. This was an interesting approach from Ruben. So Figment, it lets you decide to cast your creature as just an enchantment. So the benefit of that is sometimes these enchantment creatures... Okay, here's the thing. Enchantment creatures is what you want if you want an enchantment matter set, because Magic these days is all about creatures. You can't have a set that cares about something and have it not directly impact the way creatures attack and block, because that's what Magic is the majority of these days. But to have an enchantment creature, it needs to have an enchantment effect. Now, artifact effects are easy to put on artifact creatures because artifacts have tap abilities, have lots of activated abilities, and that's, people are very used to that. Enchantments affect the whole board very often. Global enchantments do. And so if you have a lot of common enchantment creatures that affect the whole board, that leads to just a morass of things to remember. It's like Lorwyn Shadowmoor, where the boards are just so confusing and it's so much to keep track of. It's not fun. Like, you've successfully made Magic unfun. So people have had to be careful about that. What I like about this is you can choose to make this just an enchantment and not an enchantment creature. And then to go with Figment, you can then embody your figmented enchantments, so you get the benefit of the enchantment side of the creature. And then if you fulfill a condition, it then becomes an enchantment creature, becomes embodied, which is very flavorful to me. It's like the magic is... You're breathing life into this enchantment spell, which feels very special. I think that was a really cool idea. Unfetter was another mechanic from Ruben. I didn't necessarily like this so much. It felt very like a combat trick mechanic. Um, it was just a way to basically turn auras into split cards. Like they could become a trick or an aura, or it could be, a sorcery that helps you get past a guy for a turn. It's going to dash for auras, basically, is what it is. I didn't get to play much with it, though. It might have played better, but it seems like very limited space. Incarnate. This this mechanic is infamous to me. I'm not a fan. Pink Moth had a bunch of Incarnate, and I think the design of the mechanic is actually okay. I really like the idea. It's basically a living weapon, except for auras instead of equipment. But the way that it was written, you could do this at instant speed. So, at instant speed, you could create a 1/1 lifelink and give all your other enchanted creatures a lifelink. And it gets even crazier with all of the different bonuses, because every Incarnate card gives a bonus to all enchanted creatures. And that is kind of the problem I was talking about earlier, the just morass of complication, where at common, everything is affecting everything, and it just becomes this tangled web. And I think Pink Moth would agree. I think he even said, I didn't realize that this could be done at instant speed. It was just an accident. And I think you'd agree it's easy to simplify this and just make enchanted creatures lifelink. And then maybe at uncommon you have some that affect all enchanted creatures. I mean, just having an aura that can be cast on just a 1/1 elemental creature token is cool, I think. This is kind of a fun card. Just bouncing a creature or enchantment. Okay, so this was an interesting design by Bear where if you have enchanted creatures and you cast this Wrath, everyone loses their creatures, but you don't lose your enchantments. They go back into your deck. I mean, I thought it was a fun thing. Edge Knight. Inanimate had this really great flavor of a Alice in Wonderland world for his enchantment world. And he didn't have any mechanics. He just had design goals and principles that I thought were really cool. Gallantry. Oh, this is from Inanimate. He decided to go with an Incarnation Rare, where, it's an enchantment effect, and then if it's in your graveyard and you have an enchantment, then it kind of adds its effects to that enchantment, which I think is cool for a rare cycle. I think it's good design. Melancholia, we saw that before. This is an example where it has an enchantment effect, and so when you bring it back as an enchantment, it's really cool still. Unfetter, we saw that. Guiding Spirit. This, gives you those. Alright. I threw an affinity for enchantments. I figured that had to play well with the other sets. And then I had to have an enchantment effect. And one thing I noticed is that enchantments at common, the global enchantments that Wizards prints, they usually are just upkeep effects, so that you only have to think about it once per turn and not constantly. And so I wanted my enchantment creatures that had affinity for enchantments to have some kind of enchantment, some kind of reason for being an enchantment, other than just having an affinity for them. A lot of Luminite here. I think Bear had a lot of that. Okay, so how is this? I just mentioned how I wanted to justify my creatures being enchantments. How does this justify being an enchantment? I don't think it actually does, but there's kind of a trick to this. So when you design for Design a Draft, you kind of curate your 3 packs. So you decide what cards go into them. And what I thought would be really cool for my mirror universe plane of Simus is you could have creatures that are mirrors of each other next to each other in the pack. And so they're kind of inverses of each other. And then next to each other, they kind of make sense, right? So this is an enchantment creature Reflection. And when it enters the battlefield, you gain 2 life. So Maiden of Faith, and then you go to red, Maiden of Fury. And it's, the other side of the art. And it's also 3 mana. It's a 3/2. When it dies, it deals 2 damage to a player. Instead of when it enters, you gain 2 life. And then I could do some cute things with the flavor text too. I thought it was a really cool idea. Unfortunately, it just escapes everybody's notice because mechanically there's nothing linking them. Nothing really obvious. And it's just kind of weird that this enchantment creature, why is it an enchantment creature, right? And in a real set, you can't guarantee that they're going to be next to each other. They're like, oh, cool, they mirror each other, right? I think I really love those kinds of things in sets, but I think the cards have to justify themselves as well, outside of just their one connection to other cards. But I thought that was pretty clever, and I liked doing that, at least for design and draft, having cards that mean more because of the relationship to a specific other card. You notice things like in Kaladesh, I think it was live free and die hard. I don't think that's the names of the cards, but they worked mechanically well with each other and showed 2 different parts of the life cycle of an Etherborn. So flavor-wise, there were cool connections, and mechanically also. These aren't mechanically cool connections. So yeah, just think about, if you play lots of Incarnate, 4 mana instant speed, all your enchanted creatures have double strike out of nowhere. It's pretty crazy. And then a lot of people, knowing that this was going to be an enchantment world, they had a lot of enchantment hate. Just making conditional removal that happens to target enchantments too. Shadow Centaur focused on enchant lands, which was a new approach. And the way he did it was the land you enchant and other lands of the same land type gain and activated abilities. I think that in Magic, you don't want your lands to stray too far from being just the main resources you use to cast spells. And so giving all of your lands different activated abilities, I don't know that I love that a lot, because it's not really giving you board presence, it's just giving you more options a lot of the time, and you're kind of taking mana away from yourself to use those options, which, has some power, right? Like if you look at Ramanap Red, those were obviously pushed for that ability. For Red to have that kind of reach just in their lands is great. But these aren't just in lands. These are things it's a whole card that you cast on a land. And I think it was a neat idea, but unfortunately not powerful enough for Modern Limited. Yeah, here's an example of tapping untapped enchantments from Oddspot. Noble Escort, cool idea. The Ivory Queen, so like the White Queen from Alice in Wonderland. Very fun. Yeah, you see a lot of creatures that care about being enchanted or enchanting. So one of his sub-themes in the Alice in Wonderland world was creatures with odd converted mana costs, which I just thought was really cute and just really fun. I really wanted to draft this card and create an odd converted mana cost matter deck. And I like that he just had a nice build around enchantment, because that's one of the funnest aspects of enchantments, is you take an enchantment early in a draft and it requires you to draft or build your deck in a different way, and you build around it. That's my favorite use of enchantments, to be honest. And that's kind of what this was attempting to be. I designed this. So this symmetry ability is all your creatures with equal power and toughness get +1/+1. Like, okay, well now I need to draft creatures that have symmetrical power and toughness. And I liked symmetry because it's backwards compatible really easily. Like, a lot of creatures in Magic have equal power and toughness, but it's not often that that matters, right? So I'm making an aspect, a new avenue of Magic matter. Ideally, I don't think it ended up being that fun. It felt like too incidental, right? Prospect. I liked this card. It's just kind of a slightly pushed aura, but it's not a huge impact. Okay, another thing that I wanted to do for an enchantment set is, okay, well, how do you get more enchantments into the set other than just having some enchantment creatures? And one thing that they did in Kaladesh to get more artifacts at common in the set for the Artifacts Matter cards was the Puzzle Knot cycle. The Puzzle Knots are basically colored spells that are also artifacts. Same with the Implements in Ether Revolt. And seals were that in older sets. And so I thought, oh, let's bring back some seals. Let's have some bigger effects, though. And that's what this is. A lot of people said this is too powerful, really powerful. But I mean, it's a 5-mana sorcery speed board wipe. I guess the power is that you can wait till the perfect moment to blow it up. But I don't know. Yeah, Seal of Light. So mourning is a lot like Melancholia. Basically, you just, when you mourn a creature, you take a dead creature and make it into an enchantment. So the problem with Mourn and Melancholia is that they both look like they do nothing. They become really interesting in Design a Draft, though. This was an example of a card that can either help your cards become symmetrical or decimify other creatures. Oh, I really liked this card. So creatures can't attack alone. Like, that just feels cool. Ozbot has a lot of flavor in his cards that bleeds through very well. Like, the Mourn and Melancholia mechanics, while I don't think mechanically they're great by themselves, they do have a lot of great flavor to them. Okay, so there's Annul, like I said before. And then, just kind of typical. I thought this card was really fun. It's card draw that makes you want to draw more cards, so you can draw more cards. I mean, I would love to have a deck with like 3 or 4 of these, and you just keep assembling knowledge. It just seems really fun. I really like that, design by Ruben. Down the hole. Just kind of blink. Multiple people had 4C. I think we were, at the time, very excited about Scry becoming evergreen. This is another Incarnate. Figment. This was a fun card for the Alice in Wonderland set. Comes in with flash speed, and creatures your opponents control get -1/-. So it's probably a really good card. I just love the image, and it fits the weirdness and style of his set very well. Kind of a card filtering. Who cares if you have enchantments? This was another of my reflection cards. So you mill one, while on this side, the other side, you get to put a card from your graveyard on top of your deck. So this was an interesting way to have an enchantment creature, but I can never figure out what it means from the flavor text, even though it probably makes literal sense perfectly fine. As long as you control no non-enchantment creatures, it isn't a creature. There's just too many negatives there. This was really cool. You can create enchantment creatures where the power and toughness are switched. This was an interesting mythic that Oddsbot designed, and it was interesting trying to figure out the applications of this. Like, how does this... You can basically trade cards in your hand for cards in your graveyard. Like, you cast a card from your hand and counter it, and then you can play anything else from your graveyard. And so it's just really great card selection, but not straight up card advantage. This feels like too easy to play around, but I really liked the design. Underwater Panther. Dun, 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 dun. So Bird designed this because he kind of expected, he just kind of made a bet that a lot of people are going to have illusions, elementals, or nightmares in their sets. And you notice a lot of these mechanics create elementals, or reflections, or illusions, or nightmares. And I guess reflections aren't on this card, but he made an interesting build around that just kind of called out what he thought people were going to be using. Pink Moth also had the return of Zendikons, which, are kind of a neat idea to make lands matter without losing too much card advantage, which I liked a lot. This is kind of an appealing card. It's Divination plus Bounce, but at sorcery speed. It's just the kind of blue common that, like, I want to cast because it just feels so powerful when you do it, but you're giving up tempo when you do. Yeah, like giving all your enchanted creatures flying with a common seems pretty strong. Yeah, this is a rare that gives you a way to use the Mourned and Melancholia enchantments. Yeah. So, yeah, I made another thing I did with symmetry is I had auras that gave asymmetrical bonuses, but the idea being you use those to combine them with asymmetrical creatures who are asymmetrical on their toughness side, and together it becomes symmetrical and you get an extra bonus. So with 1 mana you can give something +2, +1, and lifelink if the power and toughness match well enough. The problem is those combinations weren't common enough or powerful enough for it to actually affect limited. Also, it's kind of diluted across 8 different sets. Multiple people designed this kind of black creature where when a creature dies, if it was enchanted, it returns, which I think was really smart design, because one of the downfalls of enchantments is they're often auras. When you cast on a creature and the creature gets removed, you're way behind. You've spent 2 cards to their 1, and that doesn't feel good with auras. But with things like this, you can kind of take that back, and which encourages people to play more auras. This is kind of a nifty card discard spell. Deface. Very asymmetrical here on purpose. Derision of the Fashionistas was kind of a meme card. Which I liked. I really liked this card. I don't think it's good enough, but it was an interesting design where you can, it's a burn spell unless they discard a creature. And so if there's situations where either of those are good for you, it's an interesting card to play. Might be too situational, but it's interesting. Oh, I had another mechanic called Reflect to go with my Mirror Universe Simus set, where you have these spells that have flashback, but it's not strictly flashback. You have to pay an opposite mana cost to what you paid. So if you play black, then it's white, and you exile it from your graveyard, and you have the opposite effect. So you can make them lose 3 life and then pay white later to gain 3 life. It's a very aesthetic design. There's no like super great mechanical reason for it, just that it matched the themes I was going for. So this is a discounted reanimation spell that only reanimates creatures into enchantments. And if you do it on an embodied creature or a figment creature, that can later become embodied. So it's a little parasitic, but it still has a lot of interesting applications. Like there's some huge creatures that are great to reanimate just for their ETB abilities or their static abilities, and this would be a cool way to reanimate them. Oh, I really liked this common black ramp spell. It was an enchantment. Maybe a little too much color pie break, but in the right set, I think this would be a cool thing. I liked all of the different approaches to enchantments. Figment. And I liked the embody triggers for the Figment cards. That was a way to distinguish archetypes in the set, I imagine, also, where these different colors, their embodied triggers, kind of encourage a certain style of play. Whenever a creature dies, you may gain 1 life. So just a common, straight-up enchantment. Pieces of Mind. Yeah, this was probably too strong, but I made a enchantment Necrotal. Seal of Return, Seal of Tutelage. This was a symmetry creature that doesn't start out symmetrical. So you want to put Boon of Ixie on Shade of Ixie. And note that Ixie is a symmetrical name, or another palindrome. I think I liked the aesthetics of my design probably more than the actual mechanics of my set design, but I felt pretty clever. Yeah, there's another of the Charm Roach effect. And there's also just a lot of great vanilla common designs here. And when I say vanilla, I just mean designs that could be in many different sets. Like this guy is a house, right? It doesn't necessarily interact with enchantments, but it matches the set flavor. It's great art. Just a lot of fun things like that. Rack Brains. Angry Boy. This was another meme card. Ended up being in the red-black meme deck. pardon. I liked this card for a big red spell that's Lava Axe plus, you know, the land tap effects. This is a card I would like to reprint in another set sometime. Alright, so we're in red. I'm probably going a little long on the video, but red is very interesting for enchantment matters. It becomes then, how does red care about enchantments? Because red specifically cannot interact with enchantments. Like how do you have red interact with the main theme of a set where by rules they can't interact with it? This was an interesting approach by Burr, where you could enchant any non-land permanent, so that includes another enchantment, and then on that player's turn it burns them, and they are the ones who can remove it. So this doesn't remove enchantments, it just hurts the other people because of their enchantments, which is still a bend in my opinion, but it shows for a set like this, if we're actually doing an Enchantment Matters set, I think a bend like this is okay, because I mean, you got to have something to show. Yes, red can interact with this somehow. There's another reflect card. Fun Figment. You had cards that, if they're enchanted, they got bonuses. There's one mechanic that I have just randomly skipped over that Burr did that I really liked, and I thought was probably the cleanest enchantment mechanic, although I really like Figment. I think that was another good one. Flamekeeper, so another symmetrical thing. Fume Drinker. One thing Inanimate did, I talked to him about this, about, you know, how do you have common enchantment creatures? And what he did that I liked a lot is he made the enchantment trigger something that only happened once a turn, kind of like how I did with the upkeep triggers. He did it on combat triggers. So like at the beginning of combat, you can give another creature +2/+0 until end of turn, which is some amount of complexity, but it's not a lot of complexity. Like you're not waiting on the stack so that you can, you know, blow them out for having not paid attention to the board. This is another cool build around that Burr had. He had several cool build arounds. Goblin Toppler. This was also a meme card. I really like it. Some people are like, oh, this is too powerful. I actually think these days, the way that Wizards is printing common creatures in their latest sets, this is not too powerful. It's not a 2/1 blocker. Yeah. But I just like the flavor text. He was Goblin Toppler. The idea is when you attack with him, you can make something else asymmetrical or create symmetry. So he's adding weight to the top of something. Ever since Grok toppled his first cow, he knew that this was his calling, that he was born a toppler and would topple until the end of his days. I miss that kind of flavor text these days in Wizards cards. Hopeless Romantic. A little pushed. I've just wanted to design that card for a long time. It's probably too strong. And I've always wanted to reprint. You notice the theme here? I just like that slice of red's color pie, because it's a little different than dealing straight up damage. But that's kind of the fun of red, is that they just really love direct damage, and they're really good at it, and that's all they want to do. And that's okay. This is an... I feel like this could have been an enchantment creature. Notice that a lot of people didn't kind of decide what all enchantments were going to be like in their set. That, you know, this is the way enchantments interact with the set. They're all auras, or, you know, they all do this or that. A lot of designers had a bunch of different approaches. Like, some of them said, okay, you can tap enchantments, but also there's just enchantments that give you other abilities, or, you know, auras, things like that. Everyone looked at it from all angles, I think. Okay, Enlighten. This was the other mechanic I really liked that Bear did. It's kind of like an inverse Bestow. And the problem with Bestow, in my opinion, was that when you go to cast a Bestow creature, you almost always want to Bestow, because there's just so much card advantage in doing it that way, but it costs a lot of mana to do so. And so early on in the game, and Theros was a fast format, you have your 2 mana a green bestow creature, which can also bestow at 4 mana, I believe, or it can just be a bear for 2 mana. Sometimes you're just going to need to play it as a bear, and it's good to have that option, but that's the kind of option that's like the road less traveled, where, you know, as you go down it, you're forever thinking, what if I had taken the other road? Like, maybe I should have saved this for the value at 4 mana and just lost some life instead. And those kinds of calculations are good for a game to have, for players to think at the end of a game, well, there are other choices I could have made. You know, maybe I made some mistakes. It wasn't up purely to chance. However, I think it feels better to have the value side available after you play the card initially. So if you have this card in your hand, there's no question, there's no lenticular complexity, right? Where it's like, oh, should I save this for later to put it on another creature to give it haste? No, you just play it on turn 3 like a 2/2 haste creature. Then if it dies, then you have the option to create value later. And I think generally that just feels better in limited. It's simpler. Like I said, it gets rid of some of the lenticular complexity. Mark Rosewater has articles about lenticular complexity. They're very interesting, where like the text on a card is very simple and the effect of the card is very simple, but the complexity is in the strategic use of the card. Like a 4 mana 2/1 flyer that when it enters the battlefield you can destroy an enchantment. Well, when you play this card, it's always good to play flyers generally, because that always presents a clock. However, the card wants you to save it for removing enchantments. So the card asks tough questions, and you have to really weigh things without a lot of information. Like, you're not going to know exactly what enchantments they have and when they're going to draw them. And that fights against the other aspects of the card. Even though it's a completely simple, normal card, it creates complexity that you have to be mindful of as a designer. And I think Bestow had some of that. This does not. That's the end of my little rant. Okay, this was another really fun application of red and enchantments. So red can have things that are enchantments, as long as, they're still very much a creature, very much whatever else they are. And I think there was even an archetype in M15 that was red-white auras. And so this card cares about auras. It's a mage ball. You cast it, and you can put a huge aura on it. But then you have to sacrifice it. So it feels like you're cheating to have a free aura, right? But then it's going to get sacrificed when this thing gets sacrificed. So, very fun design. I like that a lot. It fits red's color pie very well. It's like, okay, sure, you get your free enchantment, but it's going to die at the end of the turn. Everybody was really high on prowess also. I like this design, maybe one of my more favorite symmetry designs, because you can make it symmetrical within itself. And then there become situations where, okay, maybe I lose the double strike so that I can get high enough power to just kill this thing in first strike damage and not trade with it, even though I lose the double strike. So this is kind of a puzzle card that I liked. And it's also very satisfying for a player to create symmetry. Symmetry is just innately satisfying. And so to have a card that says, I want to be symmetrical, help me, and you make it symmetrical, fun. Yep. So there's another way red can care about enchantments, as long as you control one. And casting, the flavor of phoenixes, which is very much in red, except as an aura instead of as a phoenix itself, I think was another cool way to think about it. This looks a lot like it needs to be an uncommon, though. Perhaps a rare. Several people had this approach to enchantments in red. I think Burr had a creature that did the same thing. Because what does red want to do? It wants to burn things. So that's how it can care about its own enchantments. And this, you can make it an enchantment instead of a creature when you play it. And if you do so, it becomes a spell that burns them. So like I said, a lot of circling all angles. And this was the Charm Roach effect, except as a red aura. Actually, no, it's not. That's not what it is at all. This is Rancor, except red. Just a typical Phoenix. Oh, this is another good approach for red, because red can animate lands. I think it's like secondary in its color pie, perhaps primary. Shock. This is, again, red's aura space. And it gives bonuses for how many auras are enchanting it. So it encourages you to go all in on auras on one creature, which again feels very red. You're going all in on something. And then when it dies, you lose the value of all those cards that were on it, but this then becomes a removal spell for your creature dying. I thought this was really cool. And I love the title, Star of the Show. It's good design. And then this is kind of the Starfall approach, where you just add conditions to the removal. You get a bonus for killing an enchantment creature. And then we saw that approach as well. Tatanka Roamer. The flavor and Shadow Centaur's Laredo stuff is so good. Tormenting Voice. We mentioned that. I really liked this a lot. I really love Red's new card advantage spells that aren't really card advantage, but good card filtering. I liked, was it like Magma Visions or whatever, where it just cost 1 red, you discard a land, you get to draw 2. And this is a version of that, except you have to discard a specific kind of card, including enchantment. Alright, enough about red and all that. Day by day. This is a fun kind of engine enchantment. I really liked Odds Bods cards, like it had a definite flavor style, art style, and you really felt like there were a lot of interesting approaches to enchantments just within his one set. Dual Horizon, I was on the symmetry thing. You can have a land that adds 1 mana of one color and another mana of another color. Elvis Traveler. Inanimate, since he didn't have any named mechanics, he just wanted kind of an odd, whimsical feeling to things. And so a lot of his cards are just kind of neat, interesting individual designs. Like this one, like a mana dork that only gives you colorless. It's basically like Unknown Shores, the elf. And which feels a little weird in a good way. And the bonus for things being enchanted. Nice vanilla application of Enlighten. I'm probably missing some very interesting cards as I go through this, but Wave Wanderings, so fun. Okay, Ruben had this build around Mythic he wanted to, I think his first pack started with. And after I put everything on Plane Sculptors, he asked to lower the mana cost by 1, just because 7 mana is a lot in Limited, and it's already difficult to get the 5 colors. But to help you do Enchantment Storm, Jabberwocky, and this has that at the beginning of each combat trigger that I was mentioning earlier, except at the Mythic rate, right, where you can choose some really cool keywords. Light into Being, you get 3 different tokens. I'm just going to go through these because I think these are just good designs. It's always fun to see. Oh, I really liked this card a lot. You can destroy a creature, return an enchantment, or destroy an enchantment, return a creature. I really liked this card. It was very cool aesthetics. Oh, and this is a cool removal idea for the set. It might actually be in Laredo. I'm not sure. Now, Inanimate, he had these hybrid cards because he figured in Design a Draft it'd be helpful to have some hybrid so people could make their colors. Because you can't really control the colors of all the other sets, but you can make your packs at least helpful by having these hybrid or artifact creatures. And he had each hybrid card be a portmanteau, so like a mix of words. So Frabjous Guardian, Slithy Tove, Uffish Humbug. It's just, and since they're hybrid, they're also kind of prominent cards. Like when you see them in a pack, it's like, oh cool, a hybrid card. And they just do such a great job of carrying the flavor and experience of his set very well. So I really love these designs. And Ruben also had a similar idea, throwing some hybrid cards to kind of help the draft go okay. One split card. Split Enchantment, Hither and Yon. It was a good card. Only cast gem spells. A little parasitic. I would say maybe have tap, add C, and then have that as well. Barking Arm. So the artifacts, not as important. Memorial Stones can help you mourn things. Zoopity Bopper was another meme card. It ended up in the same deck as Angry Boy and Goblin Toppler. So that was a fun deck. Scarecrow, Enchantment Hate. There's a lot of Enchantment Hate, but also a lot of Enchantment Synergy. So it became, I mean, I don't remember if this affected the games or not, but I was kind of wondering if that would make for very swingy games, where it's like, oh, I have lots of enchantments that work together, I win. Or, oh, I have perfect removal for all your things because I have so many ways to destroy enchantments. That's all the things you have. Some lands. Oh. Very good. And tokens. Anyway, that was probably a much longer look than I initially wanted. But this was a really great experience and just really educational to see all the different approaches to using enchantments. So if you're designing a set and you need enchantment sub-themes, you're looking for an enchantment mechanic, definitely think about some of the applications here, things that worked, things that didn't. Hopefully one of these things gave you an idea. But thank you for watching. This has been Design a Draft 1 Enchantments.